Hello, my name is Ken Arrington. My wife and I lived in New Orleans, where I was in charge of a museum about the paranormal. That was my life, the paranormal, the occult, witchcraft, and things like that. We had been married for a year, and she was pregnant with our first child. The pregnancy was going wonderfully well. Everything was perfect. Until, a few days after Thanksgiving, in the 7th month of pregnancy, the baby stopped moving. We went to the hospital, and an emergency cesarean section was performed. We found out that the umbilical cord had caused trauma to the baby, something that seemed like an accident, and we lost our child, who was only 5 days old. But at that moment, while we were losing our child, something very special happened. A presence took over the environment, and it was very comforting. Although we should have been experiencing deep pain, somehow we experienced a peace I had never felt before. I had lived through many strange experiences, but nothing like this. My wife then began a desperate search. She had started a new job and made new friends with people who attended a church. I was okay with that, I didn't mind. I grew up in a Christian faith, believed in God, but not necessarily in Yahweh, as it said. I had a life full of experiences with different religions and believed in something like a universal force. A few months later, my wife started going to church, and since I loved her, I began to go with her. I wasn't very comfortable with the whole church idea, but for love, I started accompanying her. And after some time, this led to a very powerful face-to-face encounter with Jesus. I don't want to go into too many details about that, because it's not the focus of this testimony right now, but it was a deeply impactful experience. And from that moment, I was faced with a dilemma. What do I do now? I had had experiences with all these other things, but now I knew Jesus was real. It's different when you know. It's not just something you believe by faith. Of course, there is faith in that process, but when you know physically, there is no more doubt. From that moment on, everything changed, and a decision had to be made. My wife and I threw ourselves headfirst into this new path. It wasn't a superficial Sunday morning experience for us, it was our life. Suddenly, everything changed. And we were those Christians who, because of our pasts and the lives we had led, ended up scaring even other Christians. The change was so drastic that it caused some strangeness even within the religious institution we were part of, but instead of scaring us, we had an amazing pastor who became a great friend. Instead of fearing our transformation, he would say, "Wow, the Lord has something very special for these two." What happened next is that we were invited to a conference where all of this was happening. There's a guy named Georgian Banov. He's Romanian, known as the Man of Joy or the Apostle of Joy. He's always very happy, very excited. He was preaching at a church that some of our friends pastor. We were invited by another group, so we went to this church. Suddenly he makes a call. "Who wants to be a missionary? I feel the call to be a missionary. Come forward." He was like, "Come on up." And my wife, without thinking, runs to the front like Moses crossing the Red Sea, you know? It was in her heart and she went for it. I, on the other hand, was like, "Oh no, man," because I didn't want to be a missionary. I grew up in church hearing horrible stories about missionaries my whole life. It was always, "Oh, I need money, give me money." And honestly, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. But she felt that calling and went, so I, oh my God, followed her. My God. He was praying for people going down the line until he got to me. He placed his hand on my head and suddenly I woke up. I don't know how much time later, just laughing and giggling. It was a crazy experience. I grew up seeing this kind of thing, people falling in the spirit, being touched on the head, and most of the time, I saw all of that as fake. I grew up in a Pentecostal house and saw many of these things being faked. I thought it was all just mass hypnosis or mass hysteria, but what happened to me was real. I really fell and passed out, and when I woke up, my ribs hurt because apparently I had been lying on the floor laughing for about 20 or 30 minutes. It was the strangest thing ever. I was like, "What is this?" So I got up and suddenly I thought, maybe this missionary work could be cool. And within 2 months, we were on our way to India. There, in the middle of the darkest and poorest places, in the slums, we saw incredible things, praying for people. It was like we were living something out of a movie. And I thought, okay, Lord, this is getting too intense. It's kind of weird. Later, I went back to India again. My wife and I were determined. This is our life's purpose. We want to be missionaries. We want to go to the toughest places. We want to do this, that, and much more. We were trying to figure out how to move to India, how to go abroad, since we felt this calling. But no matter how hard we tried, things weren't working out. Everything was falling apart. That's when I was invited to go to Cuba. I was excited. I had always wanted to go to Cuba. I'd been to other Caribbean countries and loved the Caribbean, so I was excited to go to Cuba, and that's how I ended up going there. I went alone because my wife and I had just had our second child after losing our previous child. So we had a daughter, then another son, and 6 weeks after he was born, I was already on my way to Cuba. When we got there, things started to get really intense. We arrived in Cuba. I can't say much about the area we were in, but we were in southern Cuba. When people think of Cuba, they usually think of Havana, but it's like someone going to the United States and thinking they've seen all of America just because they visited New York. Cuba is not just Havana. It's very different. Our local contact met us and we went to a village that was shaded by the mountains. As soon as we arrived at his house, we settled in. It was really hot. It was February, but the heat was unbearable. The local pastor invited us to go to his church, but it wasn't really a church as we imagined. It was basically a large open concrete space. In Cuba, if you have a church and it grows too much, the government intervenes and takes the building for another use. So the pastor, very proud of his work, took us to his church. On the way there, we saw a woman in a black dress, which seemed to be the uniform for someone who works as a maid. She was sweeping the floor because there was a school nearby, and she was cleaning the concrete area where the children played. As we walked, I strongly felt that the Lord wanted this woman to know how much He loved her. I thought, okay. So, I said to the pastor, "Pastor, can I ask you to translate for me? I feel like the Lord has something for this woman." He agreed. We walked up to her, and in the middle of the way, there was a fence between us. I told the pastor, "I need you to translate everything exactly as I say." He said, "Okay." Then, I started to feel that the Lord was pouring a very strong love over this woman, and I began to tell her things I knew about her life. I said that the Lord loved her very much, that she had a heart of sacrifice, that the reason she worked was very honored by God, and that He wanted to bless her with His love. I was saying all of this, and I realized, because I had a few years of Spanish, that he wasn't translating exactly what I was saying. He was hesitating with the words, and another person in our group, who spoke Spanish fluently, looked at me and said, "He's not translating exactly what you're saying because, in his understanding of how Jesus relates to people, it would violate his beliefs. This woman is a witch." Santeria, which is one of the dominant religions in that region of Cuba, mixes Catholicism with magic. It's not voodoo, it's Yoruba magic, which comes from Africa, and these practices combine. They pray to Catholic saints, but in reality, they are the orishas, which are, to simplify, energetic forces, or, as you could say, gods. He didn't want to say exactly what I was telling her because, for him, according to his view of Jesus and faith, it went against his understanding of what is right. I said to the pastor, "I need you to translate exactly what I'm saying. I know this is hard, but I need you to say it exactly." He agreed, and this time, he did as I asked. As soon as he translated what I had said, her face completely changed. She stiffened a little, but not in a bad way. It seemed like something inside her had been illuminated. She started to cry, and I said, "Look, Jesus loves you. He has been looking at you. He has his heart over you. Jesus created you to have a relationship with him." She was completely transformed. She was devastated, deeply touched. At that moment, we were behind a fence, so we went into his church, and within a few minutes, she appeared again, coming from behind the church, holding all those little faith idols and a shell necklace that they used for protection. She started to take off everything that symbolized the protection of her gods and handed it to me. She said, "Everything I knew, it only took you saying those few words for me to throw everything away." It was impressive. She was going through such a deep experience that she threw everything out of her life, and she was completely impacted, like, "I just want to give all this up." This is something I see a lot, and that's why I don't usually get too involved in discussions, especially on social media. People want to argue, but no one has ever been convinced to enter the kingdom of heaven through argument. It doesn't matter who you are. No one has ever been convinced through debates. Some people may be convinced that something is happening, but the Lord is looking for a relationship. And that's what happened with her. She came to me, gave everything up, and at that moment, the pastor was left speechless. He said to me, "In 15 years working in this village, I've never seen anything like this." And from that moment on, he started translating exactly what I said. He would say, "Okay, fine." She gave up all the idols and started following us everywhere, talking to other women in the village. And suddenly, the pastor's phone started ringing. People were asking, "Send the guy with the long curly hair to our house." And there we were, heading to the houses of these women who practiced witchcraft. They had all their idols piled up at the doorstep and called us, "Come in, tell us about Jesus." And that's what we did. They had already heard about Jesus' love, but they had never experienced that love for real. They knew about witchcraft and other gods, but they had never felt the true essence of Christianity. To them, Christianity was just an idea, but what we brought, the true faith, deeply moved them. In no time, we were there with a mission team made up of me and 3 women, all in their 60s. Then, 3 days later, 350 people showed up in that small village. Everyone was trying to squeeze into the small church, and I couldn't even speak in the church because, as a white American, that wasn't allowed. But the pastor said, "I need you to speak anyway." And I said, "Okay, fine." So, I stood up and spoke about the love of Jesus. I don't know if it was a frequency being released at that moment, but things were happening. I'd never seen anything like this before. As I mentioned, I've been to India many times, done missionary work across the United States, and have always been involved in churches. But while we were praying for people, radical things were happening. If you watch any of my content on social media, you know I'm a very rational person, logical, with a historical and verifiable approach. But there, while we were praying, people who were crippled were getting up and walking, blind people were seeing, miracles were happening. Suddenly, the story started spreading to the other villages, and we went to visit them. Then we got the news that the secret police were looking for us, specifically for me. We did everything on foot. There were no cars. We were always walking, and the pastor told me, "If you see a motorcycle with 2 men, look the other way." And I thought, okay, fine. But the problem is, every motorcycle had 2 men. So the situation became funny, but it was an interesting experience seeing the Lord acting this way. There was a moment when the police showed up. We were walking from one village to another, and as Americans, we were there with tourist visas, which meant we should have been in a specific area. But in reality, we were in another place. We weren't good tourists. We were where we shouldn't be, because people had asked us to go there and help them. We were heading back to the allowed area when, suddenly, the police appeared, turning the corner. The pastor said, "No matter what happens, look ahead, don't look back. Keep walking forward, don't look at them." They started slowing down as they approached, and as it was obvious, I and another woman were the only white people there, so the attention was on us. We were going down a slope, and I was just thinking, now they're going to get us. They've finally found a reason to act. And just at that moment, suddenly, about 150 goats appeared out of nowhere and crossed the road, stopping right in front of the police. The officers started honking, but they couldn't get through. The road was very narrow, a mountain road, and there the goats were, standing in the middle of the way, blocking the police from passing. They stayed there, unable to move forward while we, in the middle of the situation, kept walking. At that moment, our contact said, "Walk faster, go this way," and we left, crossing through the brush. It was a very curious situation. I started to realize that if this was happening, God was clearly protecting us, so I began to feel braver. We returned to the village and stayed there for a few more days, and incredible miracles continued happening. Some things that, to this day, I have difficulty believing with my rational mind, like the case of a man with brain damage and multiple nerve injuries, who hadn't been able to open his hands for years. This man had been high-ranking in the Cuban police before retiring. He had heard about us and called me to go to him. When we arrived, he couldn't open his hands at all. We started talking about the love of Jesus and how he wanted to see his hands open. In my mind, I thought, I don't know if this will work. I don't want to give this guy false hope. What if nothing happens? That thought crossed my mind, but something told me, go ahead. So I said, I feel that the Lord wants to see your hands opened. His wife, who was translating, had been there for years dealing with his hand problem without seeing any improvement. Then we began to pray for him. And suddenly his hands started to open. He began to move his fingers and hands, and he started shouting for joy. His wife also shouted and ran down the street so happy. It was a crazy moment, completely out of the ordinary, and I just stood there looking at it, amazed at what was happening. This is simply surreal, but it's Jesus acting. I followed the model of what the Bible says, you know? When Jesus healed, he never healed anyone the same way twice. We try to complicate things with our Western minds, saying, oh, people aren't being healed because they lack forgiveness, or because they have this or that. But all of that is nonsense. I'm telling you now, it's all nonsense. That's not in the Gospels. At no point did Jesus say, I will heal you, but you must forgive first. I've never heard anything like that. He would say, by your faith, you are healed. And that's it. So, all these other things, it's all beyond belief. I called my wife, told her everything that was happening, and said, I can't believe half of what I'm seeing. Even being here and witnessing all this, I'm having trouble processing it all. I was getting completely disoriented because I knew it wasn't because of me, because, to be honest, I've never made anything happen before. I've never forced anything. And many times, nothing happens. But suddenly, I was there. And all this was happening. I realized, okay, the Lord is doing something. The Lord is preparing something. And that's when we found out that our phone was tapped. The government was monitoring us. They knew everything we were doing. On the last day, or rather, the day before we were supposed to leave, the pastor called me and said, I need to ask you something, but you can say no if you want. I said, okay, go ahead. He said, there's a family that lives on top of the mountain. I had heard about them while we were praying for people involved with Santeria and things like that. They talked about this family on top of the mountain. The pastor explained that this family had lived there for generations, at the top of the mountain, and in their belief, the magic of Santeria and other rituals had been passed down from generation to generation. And this family was considered one of the most powerful, because whoever lived on top of the mountain had spiritual control over the entire surrounding area. They were the only ones on top of the mountain, with dominion over everything around. The pastor said that over the years, missionaries and teams had come to the mountain looking for a big spiritual confrontation, like a contest of who has the stronger God. They wanted a moment like Elijah, calling down fire from heaven, confronting the witches, and all that spiritual battle. But what happened was that, instead of a big confrontation, things ended up getting out of control. The pastor explained, when you enter their territory and start shouting, they start shouting back. And what happens is that, often, the missionaries who went up and down the mountain would return with bad news, financial problems, sick children, families falling ill, or even sudden deaths. That's why people were really afraid of this family, because they knew they had power. It wasn't fear in the conventional sense of fear, but a kind of respect, like saying, don't mess with them or something bad will happen. And the pastor said, look, after everything I've seen this week, would you come with me there? Let's meet this family. I immediately said, sure, let's go. I was in a very high spiritual moment. I had never experienced anything so powerful before. When you see blind people seeing, people with cancer healing, tumors disappearing, people with irreversible nerve damage in their hands opening their hands, and even goats blocking the police from reaching us. I'm leaving out a lot of stories, but all of this was happening. So when the pastor invited me, I was ready. It was like everything had aligned, and I just thought, yes, let's do this. We had a conversation that night over dinner, and the next day the pastor said, let's climb the mountain. It's going to be an entire day because we need to climb the mountain. And we want to be respectful to them. So that was my rule. I wasn't going there to fight anyone, but I wanted to go there to see these people and for them to know Jesus, So that morning I was praying and I asked Father, what do you want to do today? And I said, Lord, give me access to their hearts. I want them to know how much you love them. But then I felt like Jesus slapped me in the face and said, I'm not going to give you access to their hearts. I was a bit shocked, and didn't know what to say. He continued, "I'm not going to give you access to their hearts unless you love them the way I love them." This hit me deeply. I had never thought about that before. After seeing everything that was happening, going into people's homes and seeing them put their idols outside, welcoming us with open arms, praying for them, releasing Jesus' love, I began to realize that the Lord really wanted something more. My hands started to swell a little and God touched me deeply. It wasn't about me looking at those people as if I had a target, like I wanted to save the witches. The Lord corrected me on that. He told me that this was just cold manipulation and that wasn't what He wanted. He told me, "I just want you to go up there and love them, no matter the cost." And I said, "Okay, that's what we're going to do." Then the Lord showed me the witches' perspective of Christians. For generations, the only experience they had with Christians was when Christians would go to the edge of their property, shouting, cursing them, saying they were evil, horrible. But in their belief, they didn't see themselves as evil. They didn't see themselves as horrible people. They believed they were doing something good for the community, working with spiritual forces to protect people. People would come to them, pay to know the future, or give animals, food, anything, so they would pray for healing or protection from spiritual forces and diseases. And the Lord showed me, they're not evil, they're wonderful people, helping others the way they understand the world. This reminded me of something. When I was in my early 20s, I had an esoteric bookstore, and I was deeply involved in the occult. The kindest people I ever met, in fact, were witches or people involved in the occult. Some of the most cruel people I've met and still know, who have attacked me the most on social media, claim to be Christians. The worst criticism I get doesn't come from atheists, witches, pagans, or anyone like that. The worst criticism comes from people who claim to follow Jesus. It's a superiority complex. We want to believe we're right, and in order for others to believe that, we end up destroying them in the process. We forget to ask what it was about Jesus that attracted sinners and immoral people. What made prostitutes and tax collectors want to be around Jesus? What made them want to pour their perfume on His feet and wipe them with their hair? What made these people feel that way when religious people just told them how horrible they were? And why do people ask, why is the church dying? Because they don't have the love of Jesus, period. If you have the love of Jesus, things will happen. Many people think that Jesus is in the church, and that Christianity is just about the church. What you're saying is exactly the opposite. The institution of the church is one thing, but Jesus and God are another. Sometimes these two things overlap, but not always. That's completely right, 100%. As Paul said, "I did not come with words only, but with power." And that power is motivated by love. One of the things I'm known for saying is that Christians want their Elijah moment, but we shouldn't have an Elijah moment. We should have a Jesus moment. We know we love because He loved us first. And that's the attitude I took as I climbed the mountain. It wasn't about proving that my God is better or bringing those people to the Lord. That wasn't my goal. My goal wasn't to bring those people to the Lord or to have them saved. My goal was to climb that mountain and love them as Jesus loved, because that's what He told me to do. And I climbed that mountain. I was on cloud 9. The pastor I was with, he said, "Let's do this." We went to the door, knocked, and the woman opened. Let me tell you, there was a woman with us who, before this trip, had never had any experience with something like this, and during this trip, she saw the craziest things you could imagine. So she was climbing the mountain, and I could see the fear in her eyes because she was terrified of what we might find there. When we got there and the door opened, I remember seeing her holding her breath because she was totally surprised. The woman who opened the door wasn't wearing those bloody sacrifice robes or anything like that, like you might imagine. She was dressed like any woman you'd see at Walmart or Target, t-shirt and jeans. She didn't look like a dark priestess, none of that. I already knew what to expect because from my past, I knew they were normal people. She went out and asked in Spanish, "Can I help?" The pastor introduced me, and at that point he was basically repeating everything I said. His concept had been completely shaken. He was all in, so he said exactly what I had said. "Hello, my name is Ken. Thank you so much for having us. I just want to come and bless your house." I remember her look. Her eyes lit up, and her head gave a little shake because she had never heard anyone speak like that. someone who said they knew Jesus. And she became curious, looking at us, and replied, "Yes, okay, let's see where this goes." She invited us in. I asked if I could give her a hug, because in that part of the country it's customary when you meet someone for the first time and go to their house to give a hug and a kiss on the cheek. The woman who was with us hugged her and gave her a kiss on the cheek, and when it was my turn, I felt like I had been shocked by electricity. It was one of the best hugs I've ever received in my life, and I've had many hugs. But this one was different, like I really knew that woman. She hugged me so tightly that I felt something happening in the spirit. I felt static electricity in the air. After we separated, she had tears in her eyes and said, "Yes, please, come into my house." We entered, and when I looked around, it seemed like a large open space where people came to pray and perform their rituals. The walls were full of things, like animal skulls, jars of herbs, and other items. It almost looked like a movie set, to be honest. Then, her husband stood up, completely surprised. He looked at me and, clearly, didn't know what to do because, like anyone seeing a stranger, he was wondering, who is this long-haired man entering my house? He was right in the middle of a divination ritual with shells. They throw the shells, and when they land, they interpret it like some kind of drawing to know the will of the Orishas or something like that. He was literally in the middle of the ritual when we arrived. He stood up, I looked directly at him, and I went to him without hesitation. Before he had time to do anything, I extended my hand, took his, and said, "I'm so honored to be in your house. Thank you, I just want to bless your house." He was speechless, looked around, and his wife nodded at him. He simply replied, "Okay." Because what they had experienced from people who looked like us, because there aren't many white people in that part of Cuba, was hatred. And in those small villages, where generations and generations of priests and spiritual practices took place, it was something totally different from what they were used to. So, they invited us to have tea after that. And the first thing that crossed my mind was, what if they put something in the tea? Because we hear stories of people being poisoned and all that. But I thought, I'm gonna dive into this, bring on the tea. So I started talking to them and began sharing about my past, the things I had been involved in, and they were totally absorbing everything, paying attention to every word, like they were drinking everything I said. We stayed there for hours, about 4 or 5 hours, just talking, and in the end, they were waiting for that moment when I would try to convert them, because they already had an idea of what missionaries usually do, but I said, that's not what I'm here to do. And finally, the woman said, "How do I receive the spirit that you carry?" I was a little surprised and asked, "What do you mean by that?" She replied, "The reason I invited you into my house is because when you hugged me, the only spirit I felt was the spirit that came with you. All the other spirits we work with just left. Since you arrived, the spirits we work with can no longer enter our house." Her husband nodded, agreeing. That's when I realized, wow, something big happened here. This was incredible because, to be honest, I hadn't gone there with the intention of having any kind of confrontation or forcing a conversion. I just wanted to go there, share the love of Jesus, and meet these people, hear their story, and share my story too. And that's what we did. The woman then asked, "How do I get what you have?" And I replied, "Well, the condition is that if you want what I have, the other spirits you work with can't stay in the same space." She started waving her hands and said, "That's impossible." Because in their culture, these spirits and idols are part of the family's history. They aren't just objects, but they are passed down from generation to generation, like an inheritance. Christians in deliverance ministries call this family spirits, but in reality, it's the spiritual tradition of a family, their spiritual inheritance. At that moment, I realized that the people were literally giving up their entire family history by letting go of their idols. They were handing over their inheritance to receive a completely different one, and that was very powerful to me. I was impressed because those people were leaving behind everything they were, everything they had lived, for something new, something that was touching them in a way they had never experienced before. The woman said, "It's impossible. My family lives here. This is all we've known." But I said, "I didn't come here to convert you. I just came to bless you and your house. If you want the spirit that came with me to stay, great. If not, that doesn't change the fact that I think you're amazing, I love you, and I honor you." At that moment, their daughter, who was about 12 years old, stood up and said, "I want to." The mother, without hesitation, said, "Of course you can." And we prayed for the daughter. It was something simple but powerful. Jesus, reveal who you are in her, in every way, in a way that I can't comprehend. And after the prayer, we said our goodbyes with warm hugs and thanks. They asked us to come back, saying, "Next time you come, please stay with us." When we left, the pastor said to me, "In 15 years, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like this. You have no idea what just happened." Later, at the airport, when we were leaving Cuba, I was detained. They went through my clothes, surrounded me with armed men carrying AK-47s. It was a big stress, but in the end, they let me board. Shortly after, we found out that, because of that experience, the family really made a total commitment to Jesus. They gave up everything because of the changes they saw in their daughter. She had been having terrible nightmares that simply stopped, and the physical problems, she had disappeared. She was healed. All of this happened, and now that couple is missionary. They travel through the valleys and mountains, going from village to village, speaking to other priests and priestesses like they were, and they are doing exactly what we did with them. They're not going to convert anyone, they simply go and express love in a way they never understood before. The mother now runs the children's ministry for, I think, 6 different churches or something like that. So, this woman, who everyone once feared, now spends the whole day with different children in different churches, talking about Jesus and teaching them about him, in a way that they, in turn, can share with others. Literally, the pastor I worked with told me, "Now I have a different problem. Now I need to disciple literally hundreds and hundreds of people." And it all started because the Lord simply told me, "I don't want you to go convert people. I want you to go love them." If you look in the scriptures, Jesus never said, "Go and convert the nations." He said, "Go and make disciples of the nations." And how did he disciple his disciples? He discipled them with love, and even then, they messed up all the time. For example, James and John wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy the Samaritans after being with Jesus for 3 years, day and night. These guys knew even how Jesus liked his eggs in the morning. They had seen him do so many things, even urinate by the boat, and let's be honest, that's real. They knew him intimately, had been with him through the hardest situations, saw him perform great healings, did healings in his name, did so many things, but still, they didn't know what spirit they were serving. This is a wake-up call for all of us. A lot of times, we want to get into arguments to prove we're right and everyone else is wrong, but that's just pure nonsense, and Jesus doesn't care about any of that. When the Pharisees asked Jesus, "What is the greatest commandment?" they were trying to trap him. They wanted him to quote something from the 10 Commandments, even though there are different versions of the 10 Commandments depending on which book of the Bible you're reading. But instead, Jesus gave a completely different answer based on Deuteronomy. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. The first thing the Pharisee asked when Jesus said that was, who is my neighbor? He was trying to put a qualification on who should receive Jesus' love, and that's what we do. Religion tries to put qualifications on who deserves Jesus' love. We ask, do Muslims deserve Jesus' love? Do the LGBTQIA plus community deserve Jesus' love? And the answer is, yes, everyone deserves Jesus' love. And many people don't want to admit that, but the answer is, without a doubt, yes. Thank you very much for listening to my testimony, and have a blessed day. Have you ever wondered how much the love of Jesus can transform your life? How many times have you found yourself searching for answers in the wrong places, only to realize that true change happens when we accept that unconditional love? Imagine for a moment, what if you applied this love in your actions, in the way you treat others, even those who are different from you? What could happen in your life, in your heart? Would it be possible, instead of arguing and trying to convince, to simply love? Are you ready to experience the true transformation that comes from the genuine love of Jesus? Or do you still prefer to continue living in control without making room for the new He can bring? If you feel that this testimony has touched something deep inside you, if you're eager to change, to seek something more, don't miss the chance to keep learning. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and be sure to follow our upcoming videos. Here, we share stories of transformation and knowledge so that you, too, can experience something extraordinary in your life. Are you ready to take that step? Leave a comment below with your thoughts and share this message with those who need to hear it. Together, as a community, let's grow in this love and learn more and more.
In college, I met a guy. He was an upstanding guy, almost like the perfect guy, and I ended up falling for him. He wasn't cruel, he was just honest. He wasn't interested that way. And that's when everything came crashing down. I thought, he's the best guy I've ever met and he doesn't want me. I got home that night and cried a lot, that ugly cry where you don't have the energy to do anything else. And then I went to God, because I always saw him as my genie. I said, God, please never let me fall for anyone again, unless it's the person you have for me. I'm done. I think it was the first time I really gave control to someone voluntarily. I was trying to manipulate, change myself to get what I wanted. And in that moment, something was etched in my mind. A thought that didn't come from me, that said, you treat me like a genie, but I can be so much more than that.
If you felt moved by this testimony and want to watch this story and more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Here, we share powerful experiences that can transform lives and strengthen faith. Click the subscribe button, activate the notification bell to receive updates, and join our community of faith and hope.